There's no place like home. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. We leave home, go on a big adventure through a dream world full of illusions, make friends, fight witches, and eventually realize the power to go home was in us the whole time. The big dramatic moment isn't killing the witch. It's when the curtain gets pulled back and we see the great and powerful wizard is just a scared little man pulling levers. That wizard represents the old god we imagined, distant, rule-giving, rewarding, and punishing. Once the illusion collapses, we realize we never actually left home. We just needed to wake up and see it with new eyes.
Dr. John Mastrogiovanni will teach you more on remembering who you are in this video. But make sure you check out his website down below in the description box at www.togetherisone.net. You'll also find many books he has written. Check out his YouTube channel by searching for Oasis of the Valley.
And I'm alive in you.
Real quick introduction, Dr. John is a really dear, I coined the phrase friendor because he's a dear friend, but also functions kind of as my mentor. Even through my deconstruction and reconstruction, I really have a high value of non-authoritative leaders in your life, speaking into your life, walking with you. I'm still an advocate for that, 100%. And John has been that for me the last 3 or 4 years. And so, and he carries so much that's gonna, without even needing to know what he's speaking on, he's gonna like bring this thing full circle. And I'm really excited about that. John, go for it, my friend. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you. No pressure. Appreciate that.
So, being a part of my life and being a part of Project 95. So go for it, my friend.
Sure. For the sake of time, I'm not going to give you a list of scriptures to validate my point of view at the moment because we just have such condensed amount of time. But I will say this, if during the Q&A you want to understand how scriptures, not limited to me, are interpreted using the Hebraic block logic compared to our Western step logic, I'd be happy to share a bit about it. At the same time, in the same way, there are considerable textual issues in the New Testament. For example, in John 8:10 through 11, where Jesus, speaking to the woman caught in the act of adultery, says, "Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, no one, Lord." And he said to her, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." Some actual Bibles have the courage to have an asterisk at that point, at that latter part, because there's a textual issue there. And that issue is, according to biblical commentators, dating way back, and even include those who disagree with each other, like Erasmus, Calvin, Beza, Grotius, Wettstein, Tittman, who else, Knapp, and Barnes, state that it was Bishop Papyrus of Hierapolis that added John 8:11 and added the phrase, "and sin no more." It actually just ends with, "Neither do I condemn you, go." That changes the whole flavor. For that matter, even some point to the section starting that the last verse of John 7 through John 8:11 was added because it didn't exist in the early manuscripts like Codex Sinaiticus and the Alexandrian Codex and all that sort of stuff. Enough said. Let me start with this. We're not really called to a new theology or new aspects of information about God. I really believe we're being called to a deeper resonance. What does that mean? Resonance is a result of vibration, and vibration is defined by what we call frequency. There was a fun commercial years ago, back in 1972, so I'm dating myself, back when we had cassette tapes, for those of you old enough to remember those things. It was made by Memorex and featured a famous jazz singer, Ella Fitzgerald. And she sang a note that shattered a wine glass. And then they played back the recording of her on Memorex, and it did the same. That is resonance. The glass did not break because it was attacked. It broke because it encountered a frequency that it could not withstand. That's what awakened, authentic, divine identity does. You can call it deconstruction or positive disintegration, but when it starts, the inevitability of awakening is imminent in phases. It does not merely give us a better theology or beliefs, though that'll come. Rather, it shakes loose the beliefs we once called sacred, but were never rooted in who we truly were. Hear me. Resonance does not destroy truth. It dismantles illusion. Once the illusion dissipates, what remains is embodiment, the lived expression of who we are. Now, because vocabulary is important to me, and those of you who write know exactly what I'm talking about, because so many times we could use a word, especially in Christendom, use a word that is very Christian, but to your audience or to the people who are hearing you, they assume they know what you mean. So sometimes you got to flip words and do different things with words to try to communicate different ideas. So because vocabulary is important, so we can grasp the concepts we're talking about, let me offer some definitions. And I'll do this as we go. The word illusion doesn't necessarily mean seeing something that isn't there. That textbook definition of illusion is something that is wrongly perceived or interpreted by the senses or the mind. In light of what we have heard in the last couple of days, I totally agree with the notion that the tree of knowledge of good and evil with its serpent is an operating system in contrast to the tree of life. The point being is that one creates the illusion of right, wrong, good, evil, rooted in egoic interpretation. If we reduce it to one word, it's just called judgment. Not true choice, but judgment. On the other, the tree of life has no judgment, but it sees reality as it truly is and makes loving choices accordingly. So here's my point, not to just reiterate Melissa's teaching from yesterday, because I could never do it that good. This cosmos or operating system is an illusion. And to take that point further, the notion of sin is nothing more than an illusion. It's something that's wrongly perceived or interpreted. For example, Jesus didn't, most of us probably know this already. Jesus didn't die for your sins, which by the way is an erroneous translation of the Greek text. He didn't die so God could forgive you or pay the debt necessary to forgive you. Rather, his death and subsequent resurrection was a way to reveal a reboot process from the old operating system to the debugged, authentic version called the tree of life. Why? Because the virgin birth, death, burial, and resurrection is not a one-off event that we're all to be in awe of and celebrate as a God. Rather, it's a divine archetype within all of us. And we're being called upon to live out that process. Jesus was tangible, but he is called the firstborn of many brothers, or the firstborn of what is to follow. This didn't just happen 2,000 years ago. That happened at the structural foundation before the physical universe or matter even existed. Hence, Christ died from the foundation of the cosmos. And that's why we chose to come here. And I don't mean to this video conference, though that is probably a part of it. I actually mean planet Earth in this form at this time. With that said, let's start from the beginning. Many of us have heard Genesis 1:26, where it says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness." The challenge with the verse is the notion of image can be misleading, not just because of translation, but because of how we use the word in modern day, especially over the last 500 years. Plus, the word image is a Western word, and as a result is abstract like the Greek language. Hebrew is not an abstract language. It's a functional, concrete language. That's why all nouns in Hebrew are actually verbs. So, for example, Yahweh is an imperfect tense verb. So is Yeshua, what we translate Jesus. It's an imperfect tense verb. Thus, the Hebrew phrase in Genesis 1:26 is Vayoma Elohim nasa Adam batzalemnu katmutnu. If we were to use more modern vernacular to translate this, it might say, and said the powers, let us do the primordial template in our shadow and thought or state of being. In other words, we're not a part of God. We are not similar to God. We are not just an image of God as in an idol picture or photo. We're actually a fractal of what we call God. Now, what's a fractal compared to image? Let me show you and I'll explain. I'll be putting up a little slide here to give you some reference. Come on, let's share. There we are. Hopefully you can all see that. Now, this is known as, let me get it back for you. This is known as the Sierpinski triangle. And it shows us in simplistic form what fractals are. So, what you're seeing in this triangle, you see the whole, but every triangle, regardless of scale, and it continues to expand, is the exact identical thing that that triangle is in every respect. So a fractal, an image presents appearance. A fractal reveals structure at all levels. This is why each human can seemingly have different appearances physically, but in a greater reality, all have the same structure. Thus, the structure is the same as the powers or God. The problem is, when we use the word God, it has a lot of baggage. So the sphere rises up from the egoic operating system and says, I am not what God is, or I'm not exactly what or who God is. I may be like him, but I am not him. And this is why Jesus changed the language from God to Father back in his day. Now, keep in mind, too, whenever he spoke to what we call God, he referred to him as Father. But to others, for the sake of their mindset, he did use the word God and sometimes then translate for them God as Father. But now pick this up further. Back in Jesus' day, Father meant something different than what it means now. Today, for many, we call God Father, or sometimes in certain circles I've heard them use more endearing terms like Papa, etc. And that's good. It's a great start. But the Father, in many respects, is still an other. Back then in John 15:18, it meant you were 100% equal and a replica of what is God. Hence, that's why they killed him and crucified him. Never say such things, because religious people get upset with that. Here's some block logic for you in a simple way, in context, not language now, context, because the New Testament, keep in mind, was written by Eastern thinking people that used block logic, even though the language was the step logic of Greek. Jesus then says in verse 19, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself but what he sees the Father do. Then he adds in verse 22, for the Father judges no one, but has committed all judgment to the Son. So many figure, okay, Jesus is then really the judge. And Jesus is going to judge us. And the book of Revelation is talking about judgment. Actually, it doesn't, but that's a whole other thing. Here's the paradox of the logic. Egoistically, or what is called in the epistles of Paul, the fleshly nature, the flesh, the ego, the triology, good and evil system judges and even condemns. And we see it all the time from before there was biblical times, literally the present day, this very moment. But because Jesus is incarnate, in other words, in the same of what appears to be egoistic flesh, so like man, technically he can judge just as any other egoistic human does. Hence, the Father has committed all judgment to the Son. But then Jesus upends that by stating earlier the Son can do nothing of himself but what he sees the Father do, which is the Father judges no one. So yes, Jesus can judge as a mere egoistic man, but he only does what he truly he only does what his true identity, the Father, does, which is judge no one. He just showed us how the tree of life system functions in this realm. Coming back to the fractal point, your true self is everything that God is. Let me say that again. Your true self is everything that God is and nothing less in any form. Here's another point to fractal concept. I remember when I first saw this, it was quite challenging and moving. And then when I have taught this class for about 25 years called the Genesis Factor, which involves the first 3 chapters of Genesis. But I remember when I saw this, back in the 80s, I fell out of my chair. Back in 1980, Dr. Carl Sagan, you may know him. He's a renowned writer and professor of astronomy and space sciences, and also was the director of the Laboratory for Planetary Studies at Cornell University. He put together a wonderful study called Cosmos. You may also know him from a book he wrote that turned into a movie in 1997 called Contact, starring Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey. In episode 10, The Edge of Forever, in the update section at the conclusion, Dr. Sagan reveals a powerful statement about the arrangement of not planets, not stars, but galaxies that he proclaims was the result of the Big Bang. He says this, quote, "Important work has now been done in mapping how the galaxies are scattered through intergalactic space. To the surprise of a lot of scientists, on a scale of hundreds of millions of light years, the galaxies turn out to be not strewn out in random or concentrated clusters, but instead strung out over an irregular aspect of surfaces." And then he shows a view of what these irregular surfaces look like. He continues by showing a computer-generated 3-dimensional depiction of the galaxies. They form a very interesting shape. He continues by saying, every dot in this computer is an animation of a galaxy. They form a very interesting shape. He continues by saying, right? This work has been done by Margaret Geller and her collaborator John Hooker at Harvard University and the Smithsonian. And he says this. When he said it and then showed it, I was like, oh yeah. So check this out. Let me go back to my little presentation here on slides. So moving from our fractal slide, he says, quote, "There is an odd mannequin shape that is presented by the distribution of the galaxies." He said that. And what he had done is has this 3-dimensional picture that he keeps rotating until it hits this. Now think of it. The galaxies we see in the 3D photo are all expanding out from the archetype, the primordial archetype. Coming back to the fractal point, your true self is everything that God is and nothing less in any form. If you are anything less, you would not be image and likeness. A fractal is not a lesser version of the whole, it is the whole pattern expressed at another scale. What changes is not its essence, but the measure through which we behold it. The issue is that our egoic, fabricated identity can take hold of even a true idea and turn it into another veil, delaying the unveiling of our true self, sometimes for a season and sometimes for seasons. But when we humble ourselves, allowing the ego to be recalibrated through what is called emptiness to it, but what to the true self is called gratitude, we begin to unveil the true self of who we are, our I amness, and the very scale of our awareness expands. Our fractal, not fractal, sorry. My daughter always gets me on that one. Our fractal consciousness opens, and we begin to perceive the whole within every aspect of creation. So two things. First, from a practical astrophysics standpoint, according to astrophysics, the universe is constantly expanding. Understand something. In chemical reactions, atoms are not created or destroyed, they're rearranged. In nuclear reactions, atoms can be created and destroyed or transformed, but total mass, energy, is constantly conserved. It doesn't change. You heard it yesterday, right? That it was the first law of thermodynamics that Melissa quoted, which is energy cannot be created or destroyed, it only changes form. Which means every aspect of the energy that empowers your physical form existed prior to what they call the Big Bang. And the standpoint of physics there, everything you are is what was then and took form now at this precise time. Hence, the suggested expanding universe we now live in, which means because you chose at this time to take form, including the possibility that there may have been other times as well, is part of the expanding universe that the Father, Source, God, Creator, of which we're a fractal, created. Being that energy cannot be created or destroyed, but is part of an expanding universe, you too are forever expanding. Think of it this way. If we're a fractal, and we're fractal expressions of the divine, then we're never outside of the creative mystery from the beginning. This gives us a deeper meaning to the Hebraic phrase, let us make the human in our image and likeness. The us is not merely a latter doctrinal formula like the Trinity, trying to explain God from the outside. It's the sound of the primordial template speaking from within itself. Humanity was already present in God as image, likeness, and unfolding expression. You are not an afterthought to creation. You are part of the pattern from the beginning, and you are now the expanding unveiling of all that God is. Why did what we call God do this? I have a suggestion for that, and I'll keep it for the end. Number two, right? So the second point. Why move from the wonder of Eden into an experience of exile only for the Christ to be revealed through Jesus to unveil the original template, the archetype that reboots the system? Because our divine identity was never meant to remain an unconscious inheritance. Let me see if I can pronounce my words better there. It was never meant to be, or was never meant to remain an unconscious inheritance. It was meant to be rediscovered, embodied, and seen from a new dynamic of consciousness. This is why Jesus points us to the child in Matthew 18:4, humble, open, and free enough to perceive what the ego has forgotten. And what we're talking about is what is known in theosophical traditions as the eternal return. This is not to be confused with Nietzsche's the eternal reoccurrence. In the Gospels, Jesus taught it from the parable of the prodigal son. The eternal return is best known to most today, though we may not realize it, as a children's book written at the end of the 19th century, later turned into a movie in 1939 called The Wizard of Oz. L. Frank Baum was a theosophist and belonged to the Theosophist Society of Chicago. Though he never got to see the movie, to make sure its truth was preserved, the screenwriter of the film also was a theosophist, and he kept the integrity of Baum's work. His name was Noah Langley. There's much to say about the movie and book, but suffice it to say that it addressed the archetype story of us and our reason for being here. Now, if you're interested in further study, I did a teaching a few months ago on this in part 5, the I Am Remembered, the Eternal Return, the Wizard of Oz. It also appears in a couple of previous books that I did. One is called The Tree of Life Realities, Melchizedek, Volume 2. In chapter 14, it's I Am Eternal Peace, part 2, Returning Home and Seeing It for the First Time. And I also spend an entire chapter in my latest book, The God Who Never Wanted to Be God, in chapter 12, called Leaving the Land of Oz. The point is, in our innocence and ignorance, like in the garden, we cannot or didn't comprehend our ultimate state of being. Thus, we chose to go on a journey somewhere over the rainbow, or as it says in Luke 15, journeyed to a far country. And the ultimate purpose of the allegory is the idea of leaving home in such a manner that awakens us to return home and see it as it truly is for the first time with new eyes. The journey, in short, is this. Keep in mind, Dorothy had 3 friends along the way, including Munchkins and the Wicked Witch of the West and Winky Guards and Flying Monkeys. They were all real in her dream world of illusion in which she journeyed. Ultimately, she learns she always had the power within her to return home. The climax is not only Dorothy's defeat of the Wicked Witch, but here is a real key: the unmasking of the wizard. Remember that famous line, "Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain." It's the unmasking of the wizard, the collapse of the illusion he represented, that the way, remember, he was supposed to take her home, but actually the way he's imagined is by great importance, and he simply evaporates in the air in a hot air balloon. The wizard is a type of the god of laws, wrath, and blessing. Impressive from a distance, but ultimately powerless to bring Dorothy home. The real key was Dorothy's awakening to her own identity, and when that consciousness returned, she saw her origin with new eyes, no longer as something to escape, but something whose value had finally been revealed. So let's approach this with a moment of honesty. Because the ego can use even correct theology as a covering of certainty, causing us to mistake right theology for the awakening to our true divine identity. Much of what we call spirituality is not strong enough to unveil who we are. Our practice is not driven by theological beliefs, especially many that we claim. It's driven by the consciousness we actually inhabit. This is why even moving toward a cleaner, truer gospel of grace can become dangerous if it only gives us a better set of right beliefs. We may see the vastness of grace, expose the errors of penal substitution or vicarious atonement theory, with depending upon your slant, and similar theologies, okay? And still end up with an ego that has learned the language of enlightenment without surrendering its need to be right. We become more right than we used to be, while the veil grows thicker and the true self remains asleep in the world of shadows. On the other hand, Embodiment is when our true divine self comes to the forefront of our existence. This is what it means to be awake. It is awareness, not merely awareness of something, but awareness of being itself. It's when our I amness arises to the forefront and we begin to live as an emanation of divine love, not as emotion, but our divine identity in the truest sense. Embodiment is the emanation of our true nature, and it's from there we begin to perceive truth. This is when revelation becomes embodiment. Because divine truth is only realized as the divine nature within us is revealed. And like many spiritual realities, this is not a straight line or linear in thinking. It's cyclical and multidimensional. Truth is realized as the divine nature is unveiled, and the more the divine nature is unveiled, the more deeply truth is realized, which is very Hebraic also, and Eastern in its way of thinking. This is why the New Testament word for aletheia, or truth, aletheia, is so powerful, and the Old Testament word amet is so descriptive. Aletheia, not the facts or systematic doctrine, nor ego-arranged information. The word aletheia is actually a negative particle word. It's a negation prior to its revelation. Aletheia means not concealed. It's the process of unveiling what has always been and what will always be us. But we're now seeing it as if for the first time with new eyes. In Hebrew, it's about potential. Amet, that word, is the very first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph. It's the middle letter, Mem, and the last letter, Tav. In other words, all the letters in their unarranged alphabetic form are the potential of all the word forms that could be. Thus, if we resonate the truth that Jesus is not an example for us, but an example of us, we must realize that in the same way he was word made flesh, so are we. Or as some say, flesh being made word, but that's actually not true. We're as much word made flesh as Jesus from the moment we entered this world. The difference is we're discovering that. Where Jesus lived that realization from the very beginning. Full stop. Let that settle for a second. Thus, the emet, the concealed truth of divine potential, emerges from the world of possibility and becomes form. Then form multiplies into forms, and this great unfolding is what we call creation. The visible revelation of limitless potential, which we call God. This is the resting of our I amness, our true self. And it's there at the doorway. It opens to infinite intelligence, a universal consciousness rooted in endless love, which is a drawn out way of saying the mind of Christ abiding within us. Now aligned with the heart and mind of the I am, our former egoic mind becomes devoted to the flow of being, rather than an obstruction of thinking. This is where the ego, or fabricated self, or whatever other phrase you want to give it, no longer needs to dominate, defend, explain, or control. Rather, it serves what's rising from the deeper reality within our divine identity. This kind of devotion transcends the mere knowledge of religious effort. This devotion is worship. And this worship is not something we do, it's something we are. Consider this. There's only one being. We've called it God, Father, Trinity, Divine Source, Creator. But at the root, this being is the truth of who we are. The ego can try to claim that, but it can't embody it. Because ego turns union into self-importance and distorts the frequency of that root. Humility, however, resonates with the divine frequency. This is why we find in Philippians Paul writing, who being in the form of God did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but emptied himself, taking on the form of a servant, he humbled himself. This was not Christ leaving his divinity. This was Christ in Jesus revealing it. This is the nature or frequency of the great I am. Consider, when God Most High approaches Abraham, remember, through Melchizedek in the 14th chapter of Genesis, he says this, Baruch Avram La'el Elyon. And the key word there is Baruch, which means bless, which the verb means to bow the knee or kneel. Whatever and whomever we perceive God, Father, Source, Creator to be, consider its initial expression is to kneel before us. Why? This is the nature of the great I am, and for that matter, our I amness. And this is exactly what Jesus does when he bends down and washes the disciples' feet. I love the example of the ocean. You've probably heard this before. Each of us are like a wave of the ocean. Every wave is a form and expression of the ocean, yet none of it is separate from the ocean. It's all ocean. God, Father, Christ, Holy Spirit is our collective shared being. We share in the divine being, and the divine shares in us in our form. Let that land for a moment. What the ego does at times is become really excited about the size of the wave it is and compares itself to other waves. But the whole time, when we're in that state of thinking, mind you, ocean never changed. We never changed being an expression or a form of the ocean and the wave. But the ego saw something different. Well, when that returns to humility through gratitude, all of a sudden, we realize what we are. A momentary form of the Infinite One. Our divine identity, again, is our shared being. I like what Rabbi David Aaron once said regarding this. He said it this way, if God were the sun, you are its rays. If God is like a dancer, you are its dance. Let me add the wave analogy, because it doesn't matter what size of your wave, it doesn't matter whether you're a ray of the sun and where you're placed, or a part of the body that's dancing. The wave, the ray, and the body are the same being. Now, one may have a thought, is he saying we're God? Well, let me put your mind at ease and upset the ego a little more, yes. You are both fractal and whole. Don't try to figure it out with the finite egoic mind. Rather, let it dissolve into the devotion of awe of our union and oneness. So think of the process so many of us have been through. We had a stirring to awake. For many of us, this is when we found religion. That's not a bad thing. That's just how we started. Hence, when we were asleep to what we're talking about right now, our sleep did not change the truth of our being. Much of what we once called worship was born from a gratitude toward a God who loved us despite our perceived unworthiness. The music, the poetry, the biblical text, the beliefs, the dance, all of it was beautiful. But much of it was still carrying the unconscious story of separation, the feeling that we were less than, unfinished, and striving to become whole, when wholeness had been our truth all along. But as we begin to awaken, or should I say, as we began to awaken, some of those expressions became something more. The music, the poetry, the text, the stories, and the dance became moments of realization places where revelation broke through, and we began to sense that the God we once worshiped as separate was now within us. Yet even that was still not true embodiment. We would say he lives in us, making the body a temple, a house, a dwelling place. We see that in certain places of Scripture for those to whom they were speaking. But it still stops short of realizing that this divine life is the very essence of who we truly are. Then, as we awakened more deeply, these expressions were no longer attempts to reach God, please God, invoke God, prove intimacy with God, or or claim God as something added within us. They became the natural overflow of our being, of who we are. Music then became remembrance. Poetry became recognition. Stories became mirrors, and dance became embodiment. What was once flowed from unworthiness and later from gratitude now flows from union. This is the resonance of remembering, the joyous frequency of awareness moving through us where creator and creation awaken as one being. Take a breath on that for a minute. So how could I wrap this up and be timely? I told you I was going to suggest a reason for all this. So let me conclude with this. Why would that which we call God create its image and likeness? All kinds of reasons we can come up with. But let me ask you this. Each morning when we awake, keyword, do we at some point dress, stand in front of a mirror, and look at what we're wearing and or how our hair is settling, or if there's a blemish on our face that needs attention? Let's be honest. We may wear our hair a certain way for some time, then change its form to see what it's like with a new attire we're wearing. Maybe we manifest in form, or for that matter, in different forms each day, or better said, in different forms in each awakening. My precious friends, consider each of us share the being of Source, God, Creator, Father, and we are forms, ways, rays, motions, and it's all different expressions exploring itself, and it's called creation. So I'll leave you with one of my favorite statements. Let me go back. I just want to emphasize it again before I end with that statement. Each of us share the being of the Source, God, Creator, Father. Each of us are forms, waves, rays, and motions in its different expressions of it exploring itself. That is called creation. So this is the phrase I would like to leave you with, and I'll end with this. It's by a rabbi by the name of Daniel Matt, and he says this: God is not a static being, but a dynamic becoming. Thank you.
I need a repeat on that last quote, John.
God is not a static being, but a dynamic becoming.
You know, I'm at a very odd place these last few days because all three of you just slam dunk these bombshells, and now I have to sit here and pretend like I have something to say that is going to. I am honestly gobsmacked, my friend. Like, that was awesome, John. That was so good. And I love how unapologetic you are about this. There's so many like people that are like really reserved. I guess when you've been doing this as long as you have, you've done it, got the t-shirt, the whole
No, the
thing, right?
truth is I'm 65 and I just don't care anymore.
Right. Awesome, brother. That was so good. Man,
Well,
yeah, Jeremy, go.
well, I want to just give a real quick snapshot. The first time I heard this message from John actually on one of our Tuesday nights was about a year and a half ago. And I didn't know what to do with it because up until then, I got close. And John said something today that was a witness of what I've done. You can't figure it out. You have to let it kind of just dissolve into who you are. And that's the only way. And kind of as this is a pastoral encouragement, I guess. Um, if this, if in any way, and I'm not seeing that anyone's getting triggered, but if this triggers you, that's okay. But because you don't have to figure it out, you can just let it dissolve. And, I'm going to kind of jump on what Melissa said yesterday. Like, like for me right now, I'll be really bold. I'm going all in on this. And if I'm wrong, so be it. It is. So be it because it's gonna be worth it. I don't even give a fuck. Like I am going all in because what it does, kind of what Rob's saying, like because I think if we're all honest, we're probably gonna have to listen to every session multiple times because there's so much here. And at the same time, what I'm learning how to do is not try to figure it out, but let it just naturally, organically become part of who I am.
I think that leads into a good point, Jeremy. Sorry, I'm grabbing my notes here. John, I think this is something that a lot of us struggle with. And in the early days, for many of us, it was this idea that I'm not my job. I am not my gender. I am not what I have. I'm not my stuff. I'm not all those things. But what's very hard for, at least it was for me, what's hard to let go of is I am not what I believe. That is an extremely hard thing to let go of. But when you think about it in the way that you've laid it out today, it becomes very easy because it's just like the whole faith thing, right? It's not the faith in Christ, but the faith of Christ. Like it's something that simply is, that runs constant. There's no, it's like trying to divide by zero. Like I can't mathematically make it make sense. So I don't try. I simply be. You just let yourself kind of just sink into it. And it gets easier, but man, is that challenging. It's so hard for many of us to just let go of like I am not what I believe. I simply am that I am. That's so cool. I really appreciate all this, John. This was great. I have other questions too, but I'm going to shut up for a minute so people can talk.
Well, and as you were talking, Rob, that that verse I think is in James was really loud in my head. There's no shadow of turning. Holy, put that on what John just said. There's no shadow of turning of him, but there's no shadow of turning of us. And and John said something, I have to hear stuff about 150 times before I actually get it. But for me, when John was talking today, about the flesh. The flesh is simply just who I'm not. It's not bad, it's not good, it's not my true self. I'm not my flesh.
Let me just say something to that, though. Maybe I'm pushing the envelope now a little bit, but the process is necessary. It's not about a negation, it's the process of awakening. And that's how, in a sense, God looks in the mirror and sees his form, to use that term. So when we get frustrated with the ego, we get frustrated with the flesh for a moment, just rather than think of it, because many of us still are trained where that's sin, that's wrong, shouldn't do that, how can you be such an idiot, all those things. What I like is when we start awakening, it just becomes part of the journey. It's just part of the process. Let it be. It's okay.
Absolutely. Odin, I see your hand, brother. Go for it, please.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. John, so much. Yeah, I'm still just trying to wrap my heart and mind around some of what you said. Well, really the last 3 days. But in this Western mindset that most of us have inherited, there's so much focus on the afterlife, and I get the overwhelming sense from the last 3 days that um, there there really is no afterlife, but only life, and then even on top of that, abundant life. And I was wondering if you could speak to um, maybe even in conversation um, with other people that have a Western mindset, or maybe it's not even worth engaging in, but how do you even address the idea of afterlife not being uh, the destination, but abundant life being the ultimate destination that we've been invited into, and it just extends, if that makes any sense?
Sure. I remember years ago when now 20 years ago or more, um, I went back to studying Hebrew, and I didn't do it from Christians. I did it from rabbis and Jewish mystics on purpose because I didn't want some of the other thinking to be a part of it. I just wanted to learn the mind and the process. And I remember one of the rabbis said this, and I'm trying to think of your question about the Eastern and Western thinking and all that sort of stuff. He would do crazy things to us in class. He would go ahead and talk about something in English, and then he'd throw the Hebrew word of what he was talking about out, and then just keep going. And we'd raise our hand and say, "Hey, what did you mean?" And he said, "I'm not telling you." And it was like, "Why? You want me to look it up?" No. He would say, to use a phrase we used earlier, "I want you to feel the resonance of that. Because if you engage your mind into knowing what it means, you'll assume you're there." He's trying to awaken us. Um, the Western mindset, the Eastern mindset, both have their pitfalls, both have their challenges. Okay. It's just in our case for our textual, we're reading this thing called the Bible, and as you know, folks uphold it. This is the Word of God and all that, and that's good. But the problem is, it's been filtered through 2,000 years worth of change and metamorphosis into a real Western mind thinking when it was written by Eastern people. So because of that, we've gotten to some of our theology and some of these well-meaning people that taught penal substitution and some of all this other stuff is because of how they perceived. Another thing the same Rabbi Laitman used to say, he goes, the scripture or the Torah he would use. He said, the Torah is a reflection of you. You will only see in it what you can see. That's why over time you can read verses and verses, and then 10 years later come back and a verse is completely different to you because something in you has changed. That's where I think, for ourselves at Oasis, we kind of, our little slogan that we say many times is we are a Christ-centered people using the Bible as a tool, not a Bible-centered people hoping and assuming Christ will be a result. And the purpose of that is how many people say they're Bible-centered, and some of the things we do and say are far from the nature of Christ. But we'll find scripture to validate our point of view. So in certain respects, I think this is where, and I'll shut up and let somebody else talk and ask a question, whatever. But I think this is where the old saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will come, is really important. Because first of all, yes, it's an aspect, when the student is ready, the teacher will come, but it's also kind of a burden on the teacher to realize if he should come. Is the student really ready? Does the student need a kind of a prod? Or is he really not? And you just smile and say, that's wonderful, appreciate you. And you wait, if even possible, to have that conversation when it comes. The catch is to understand that the Christ in all of us, God in all of us, the Father, Source, Creator within all of us, the I Am within all of us, is working toward this whole thing. It's not as if they're going to miss it. All of us are going to get it. If not in this life, maybe in the world to come. That's another message for another time.
Awesome, Dr. John. Thank you. Barry, I see your hand. Go for it, sir.
Well, as fashionably as I always am, I'm kind of late to the show. But with that being said, I came in where Dr. Mastrogiovanni.
Just John.
Okay, John.
Although, if you say Mastrogiovanni fast 5 times, you will speak in tongues. That's another story.
Oh, right. So where you were talking about the Wizard of Oz, and and this is open to anyone, but specifically you, Dr. John. I worked with doctors for 30 years, so it's in my nature. There's a scene in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the movie, the actual movie. I'm sure most everyone's seen that movie. And it's at the end, and it's where they're trying to get a message back, and like just time itself, they can't get from point A to point B in this particular scene fast enough, so the trees actually carry a message. And I know this is the absolute incredible mind of Lewis, being influenced by George MacDonald, being influenced by whoever. And when you were talking about that, and I never knew that about the Wizard of Oz. I mean, that's stunning. That that there were those kind of ties back to relational deity. But I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on. I'm not looking for God in the trees. Back in, I don't know, I'm sure Dr. John maybe remember this because he's got gray hair like me, but there was a performer many years ago named John Denver, and he caught a lot of flack for, his belief of God being in the trees and God being in nature. But he saw, it went deeper than just somebody's rubber stamp of, with a title on it, on his belief system. He actually saw something beyond what the normal American evangelical eye sees in creation. He saw beyond an inanimate object. He saw elements of the creator in creation. And I'm just curious, like, I'm just a little boy at heart. And when I think of a tree tapping on my window and talking to me in the morning, or a bird flying in and talking to me in the morning, I mean, that just gives it. This is going to sound weird. It gives me joy like you wouldn't, um, you wouldn't believe. And I'm just wondering, what do you think? What do you think the possibility of the Father, the Holy Spirit, the breath of life, actually communicating um, through the trees like that? Is that just purely a child's tale? Is it purely mystical, or is there an element of truth in that?
Well, if you're going to use terms like, is it a child's tale, or is it mystical, or is it, what was the other word you used?
Oh, I'm not sure, Dr. John.
Okay.
I have half a brain, so.
Okay. I would say yes. Give you a good Jewish answer. Yes. It's all the above. It's everything contained in it, you know? It's like one time in learning some of this logic over, there's an example that uh, a rabbi had given about after a class he had, and he said he's done at the desk taking up his books, and one of the students walked up and said, "I finally figured out what righteousness is. It's this, 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 and this." And his friend said, "That can't be right. Righteousness is this, 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 and this." So the rabbi looked at them and he said to the first guy, "Say that again." The guy says, "Well, righteousness is this and this and this and this." And he says, "You're right." And then he said to the other guy, "What did you say again?" And he said, "Well, righteousness is this, 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 and this." He said, "Well, you're right." And then the guy from the back got up and said, "How could both of them be right? That's crazy." And he said, "You're right."
Awesome.
Lincoln,
Yep, Lincoln,
Lincoln
go for
go.
it.
If you could explain the part where you said, sorry, I don't know what I did with my note. Oh, there it is. There it is. Everything you are is what was then and took form now. You chose to take form now. If you could like explain that a little bit more, because I've been struggling with that for a while now, and I'm trying to marinate in that, and yeah, sometimes I put it on the side and I'm like, yeah, I gotta take a break from this.
Well, see, how can you explain what has to be perceived? Or it's difficult. It's like part of it is like saying, "Can you explain to me what a glockenspiel is when you've never seen one before?" Or can you explain the color green to a colorblind person? It's a little hard, but let me give it this. I think m many of us are aware of verses that talk about how we were created in Christ from the foundation of the world, things like that. Um, okay. The point is, we were there, not as necessarily separate individual consciousnesses, but as a collective conscious, we were there. So when God says, or right, the Elohim says, "Let us make Adam," which by the way is also in its original form a verb. Okay, it's not a guy's name. Matter of fact, throughout Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and it's with usually the definite article in front of it, Ha-Adam, the Adam, not a guy's name. Okay, it's a function. And the issue then becomes the primordial archetype, which is the creator embodied in creation, say a single creation. When we start studying some of the Jewish mystics and even some of the other Eastern religion, it's all one thing. And what has happened in Jewish thought, which comes out of Isaiah and some other places, it's called the shattering of the vessel, where the infinite is within this ever expanding vessel, but as time goes on and the vessel becomes conscious, it becomes aware of itself, which we called the beginning stages of ego. Okay, so the vessel shatters into sparks or pieces. And it's in that it continues to expand, but now with a sense of individuation. And as the individuation comes to consciousness, as Dorothy did, she becomes aware of what the value was of what she couldn't perceive before. But the catch was, we were all there. If we're going to use the metaphor of the two trees in the garden and all that stuff, we were all there, and we never left it, in my view. Every day we stand before the two trees in certain respects. Again, that's even metaphor. But still, it's that idea. We were there, and in our process, yes, where we are in the light of things, and it maybe have had more than once, and you can actually prove that in Scripture. He might throw one at you. I'm just gonna play with you for a minute and maybe mess up your mind more. John 9. We usually read it as, let me get it for you, and I'll just read it exactly. And I'll use the New King James Version so we can be as traditional as possible. Now, Jesus passed by, saw a man who was born blind from birth. And the disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man or his parents, etc., etc. But I want you to notice the question. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents? Most of us glance over the first part and we said, generational stuff. The parent sin has been passed down on the kid. Okay, fine. Not going to argue. That's great. But it's the first part that hangs us. Who sinned that this man was born blind? This man stopped there. The implication is he's been around before.
Oh my God.
Now, how you want to play with that is going to be up to you for now. But the point is, there is something about a conscious being, a fractal, that has come into this world, born blind for a reason. Jesus, I like his things because, the thinking of the Jewish people at the time was, they believed in reincarnation. That's no new news. But Jesus' emphasis is it doesn't matter. What matters is that the works of God would be revealed in him. So I don't know if that's helping Lincoln, but what I'm trying to imply there is there's a lot more going on when we enter this realm for these purposes. And that you could say, we hear this in Jesus's words. Remember, he's an archetype.
Yep.
Jesus says that for this purpose, you fashioned a body for me. Remember in Hebrews?
Yep.
Well, what makes you any different?
Ooh. Okay. I
hope it doesn't-
could ask you another question, but that might turn into a whole mess later on, so I'm just gonna save it.
I do want to, I do want to, no, that's fine. I do want to say this though. I'm not trying to demean Jesus in one respect. But here's the point. First of all, Jesus doesn't have an ego that he cares about it anyway. Right? I mean, he's just see, what's interesting compared to serpent system and tree of life system is that the serpent projects, it knows more about God than you do. Right? Has not God said we shouldn't eat of all the trees? And the serpent says, but God knows that if you eat of this tree, you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. What's the suggestion there? I know something more about what God knows than you do. Mind you, they were image and likeness. So there's a lot of layers that goes on there, but that's one of them. Jesus, on the other hand, who probably is the guy who knew more than anything about God on the planet at that time, and in many respects does still.
Yeah.
Okay, is that he didn't play the I know something you don't, but shame on you that you don't.
He
So
did it.
reach out for this and because the act of reaching out for something you already have is a denial of what you are. Right? So you take that and you look at Jesus, he does something very different. He could say, I know something that you don't know, but instead he elevates you as his equal. I don't call you servants, I call you friends. So it's not that I'm trying to demean Jesus in any way by what I'm saying. I hope it doesn't come across that way. If it did, I apologize. And maybe it's some of our internal program that's still going on. But the other part is what gives Jesus the most joy is that if I'm going to coin the phrase, you do the greater works. And the context of, by the way, and greater works shall you do, because I go back to the Father. If you read the context, it had nothing to do with performing miracles, although that can be a sidebar. It had to do with what just he said a few verses earlier. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Now you do greater.
That's amazing, man. Thank you so much. It gave me a lot of confirmation. I was just playing video game one day and I was repeating John 1:1 in the beginning with the word. And then all of a sudden I just said out of my mouth, I was there too. And I didn't understand it. And I understand everything that you said. I still gotta marinate with it. I don't have the words to explain it yet. But I'm gonna get there. So thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Awesome. Jeremy, here, hold on one second. Let's do Melissa, let's do Barry, and then let's break because I know if the energy in the room is resonating with anybody else, I want to get into this panel discussion because there are so many questions burning in this room right now. So let's go 1, 2, 3. We'll break for a little bit and then we'll hit the panel. Okay.
yeah, perfect. I love it. Thank you. Um, I wanna kind of shift just a minute and make a prophetic observation, kind of encapsulate what's going on in my inwards. But most of us have been to several, many conferences, mostly Western expression days. And the pattern is you go to a conference hungry, you have a cool moment, you get filled up, you get some real good truth, and then you kind of go on your merry way. I've never been hungrier in my life. Like, I don't know about you, but I'm leaving more hungry than I came in. And I've just been like, I've been processing with the Father as I'm listening and just absorbing. And I think this is a die. I don't even want to say this is prophetic, but I really feel like I wanted to encourage everybody here today that I feel like there's an invitation from heaven for the greatest expression of hunger. And it's actually the starting point, not the ending point. That's it. Yeah. Let's see. Who else was going, Rob? Barry.
Melissa?
Barry, go.
No, Melissa's first, then Barry.
Okay, Melissa, go for it, my friend.
Let me get my microphone over here. Dr. John. I'm not entirely sure how to completely put this into effective and efficient language for me. Been around the block for a long time, as you have. I can't say that I came into this conference quote unquote hungry, like Jeremy was just saying. I think for so long, for so many years, when you approach a buffet that has the same food, after a while, you're just kind of not excited about that buffet, right? You kind of lose I don't care how fancy the buffet is, if it's the same thing that you're eating over, it's just kind of like, yep, it's time to eat. Okay, you lose your appetite. And if my husband was still plugged in right now, I've been texting him, trying to write my notes and text my husband and order your books and do all the things at the same time. You literally stirred an appetite in me that I have not experienced in freaking decades. And I didn't even know it was possible. Thank you.
I am very honored that you say that because you did that to me yesterday. And Catherine did it on the first day. That's why she had like the hardest job in some respects. Just to let you know, the books, I don't know what ones I'm sure you'll enjoy some of them. But I mean, the first Melchizedek book, volume 1, it's now in its second edition. Gosh, I wrote that way back. I started writing it in 2000. It took 7 years to write because I tried to be very precise. And my mindset at the time, so you may fish that out of it, was I was speaking still very much in evangelical circles. So you may hear that flavor of me trying to break through, because you know how evangelicals will say right away, well, show me that in the Word. So that's what I was doing. The second edition took another 7 years. And in between there, by the way, I wrote an older book, which really needs to be redone because it was written back in 2003. I stopped Melchizedek after chapter 3 because of something my friend said to me, who was a pastor, because I had this thing rolling around called The Divine Womb, the Prophetic Purpose of Women in the New Millennium. And there's a lot of symbolism on that cover. But it was the idea that, in that book anyway, it had to do with the feminine voice. And I don't just mean that, again, book needs to be rewritten. I don't just mean the feminine voice from women, but the feminine voice within us men as well. But anyway, Melchizedek 2, Tree of Life Realities, I get a bit more bold. And then because of that book, another friend of mine said, can you just write a book that doesn't have over collectively, there are over 1,000 pages, with the first book over 130 footnotes. Can you just write a book that kind of speaks to some of the concepts? So that was The God Who Never Wanted to Be God. And honestly, some of the things I was sharing here, I didn't necessarily brave in some of those books yet. Of course, that was a couple of years ago. So enjoy. You have questions, let's stay in contact, and hopefully, I know my wife was saying the same about Catherine and Melissa, that you too, Melissa, is that, we want to pick your brains, maybe zoom you into Oasis and have you share and all that stuff. That'll be really great. So,
John, you make life so much fun, man.
hey, what can I tell you? It's just awesome. Just this has been an awesome time. I mean, I was shaking during some of this, not because I was just scared, because yeah, I mean, Catherine and Melissa is something to live up to. But but it was also just feeling the intensity of what is here, and I think my body was that, or 2 cups of espresso possibly did that too. But because I although I speak a lot of this stuff and talk about the stuff from different angles, some of the same phrases, I rarely ever go somewhere without starting from scratch. So that's what I did. So I got off yesterday and I started writing this again and mulling over words and dialogue and whatnot. So I got to bed about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I woke up at 6 to um, shape this a bit better, hopefully. Anyway, thank you. Appreciate you. This
Yeah.
has been spectacular.
Well, and I see your hand, Barry, and then we'll take a break. But I want to say this, and Odin said it on the chat. But probably my favorite part of this whole thing just happened just now, and it's extreme level of honor. I mean, and I was crying too. I have tears in my eyes because I mean, and I'm so glad, I'm so glad I've got delivered from basing success off numbers, because I could give 2 shits about numbers today. And like this was 100 times more successful than I could have even imagined. With all the technical difficulties, with all the other stuff we've had to navigate, absolutely amazing. And so I want to honor you guys and thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, John, just for serving us so well. But really, this is what I want to highlight, because each of you did it so well, and you modeled what this whole conference is about, is you brought your authentic self. And I really appreciate that. Barry, go for it.
So, Jeremy, you were spot on. The last trip I made to a conference, it's almost like going to summer camp or whatever. You go in, you get jacked up, and then you come home, and it's always the Monday after, right, that you start dealing with things, and none of the hocus pocus and abracadabra sticks around, unfortunately. My grandma had a cat named Velcro that stuck around a lot longer than a lot of the abracadabra isms and the Pentecostalitis that I got in my right knee that won't go away. But anyway, um, the interesting part about this, and this is I'm and I'm saying this to honor all 3 speakers. I lived in Western North Carolina for almost 2 years. I lived right outside of Brevard, which is the land of 1,000 waterfalls. And the most interesting part of those waterfalls is as you're riding along and you see the waterfall, it's like, oh my gosh, I don't even see a road. I don't know how to get over there to get closer to that beauty, to the coolness of the water, to the foliage. I don't know how to get there. And you actually have to build relationships with the locals to say, you know, well, hey, how do you get to that waterfall over there? Well, you go off this road, you take this road, you go up this dirt road. There aren't any signs. And so it requires, to get to that water, it requires relationship with people who have been to that waterfall, who have probably dipped their hands in the water, put their feet in the water, maybe even submerged themselves in the water. And the most beautiful thing about what the three of you saints have done is that you haven't given us a gimmick. You haven't been fighting over who's going to sell the most books or who has the largest table outside of the sanctuary. You've taken us, each one of us, to the side and said, well, okay, you see that particular well, or that particular spring, or that waterfall. I'm going to tell you exactly how to go and open up that, because that's exactly what's inside of you. And it's absolutely stunning. And it to say thank you goes the pales in terminology, and my lexicon is bleak these days. With that being said, Dr. John, and I want to reiterate something, a comment that was made in the chat. When you were talking about the blind man and his possibility that this wasn't his first go around, I'm not going to make the assumption, and I don't want to put labels on anything, but the only terminology I have for that is the idea of reincarnation. Is that, and you don't have to answer that now. It can, I don't know if we're moving to another chat or how this is working, but I would love to know, like, is that something that, was that a possibility, or is what you were referencing the possibility of above and beyond what our minds currently comprehend concerning the idea of a reincarnated state or a second time around?
Well,
Hey, let me do something, Barry, because we have to get to that. Okay? I really want all three of them to speak on this idea of incarnation. Is it okay? Can we take a break and then pick right back up there? Would that be okay, Barry?
Brother, this is your show, and I'm sitting in the back with popcorn. You do you.
Well, I know Esther wants to hit on that. I want to hear on that. I think this is a great jumping off point. Rob, is that good with you?
That's perfectly fine. I'm going to suggest something here. If there's severe heartburn about this, y'all let me know. I know we originally said 30 minutes. Is 15 okay? Is that cool? Okay. Let's do 15 minutes so people can do what they got to do. We'll come back. I don't want to lose momentum here, but we've been going for a little while. So let's take 15 starting right now. Not now, but meow. And then we'll come back and we'll attack this stuff. So awesome stuff, guys. Thank you.